All right, so it's been a month. Yeah, sorry about that. I've gotten a lot done. I just realized that the way that I was presenting everything that I was doing didn't really make a lot of sense if someone wanted to follow along, because I wasn't really doing it in a linear fashion that was easy to follow. Like, oh yeah, here's, a well thought out step one. Instead it was like, well, I bought a bus and I don't know, what's next? And so, as fun as it's been for me, that doesn't really help anyone that wants to try and follow along and do it on their own. And so I thought, you know what, let's stop, let's take a month, let me get a number of different things done, and then let me put out a couple of videos that are kind of specific to a particular topic. So how do you install solar panels on the roof, or how do you do subfloor, or how did I go about cutting the insulation in the thing? That seemed like a much better way to kind of go about doing it, and so I think that that's going to help the clarity of what I'm doing a lot, which is good, like really good, because I'm a teacher and I can't get away from the idea that information must be presented in a clear and concise fashion. And so so that's what we're doing. All right, so I got on my solar panels today, and I went to start attaching these Z brackets, only to find out that the holes don't line up exactly where they need to go. And it's not exactly the end of the world. It is a little aggravating. I think that I just kind of very incorrectly assumed that a Z bracket is a Z bracket. And I think that I could probably force this to fit, but that just doesn't really seem like a good idea, especially when just drilling another hole would probably be just as simple and probably sturdier. So that's what I'm going to do here. So a couple of things. I don't really love drilling into this aluminum channel with the solar panel behind it, and so I'm going to do a couple of things. The first thing that I'm going to do is I am going to start with a very small drill bit when I go to drill the hole. That way I can be sure that I am able to get the larger drill bit to line up kind of exactly where I need it to go, because I'm not going to try and cut some weird, elongated hole here. The other thing I'm going to do is that I really don't want to put a drill bit through the back of this panel, and so I've grabbed just a kind of scrap piece of wood. I'm going to clamp it in the back after I kind of measure in how far I want to put this. Once I clamp it into the back, then I'll feel a little bit better about drilling in, and hopefully I don't really screw up and ruin the panel. So we'll see how the whole thing goes, I guess. I'm going to get the solar panels moved back a little bit so I can get at least 2 of the bolts into I guess the frame of the bus itself. For the other 6, I'm going to use what's called a jack nut that goes through the sheet metal and it expands out, and I'll kind of show you what that looks like. But jack nuts are really great for sheet metal because they make a threaded insert that is really easy to kind of work with. Can sometimes just push them in. They require a 7/16 inch hole, which I've already drilled. Sometimes you have to bang them in. Either way, you install them into the sheet metal, then you thread in
the bolt, and what I have to do is kind of tilt the bolt up a little bit so I can put my finger on the jack nut to tighten it down a little bit. Now you want to have a little bit sticking out of the bottom so it has a good tight grip. So I'm going to thread the top of this little nut down onto the carriage bolt, and I'm going to use my needle nose vice grips because it'll hold it nice and tight. And I'm going to put a little pressure on the top of the bolt, and as I'm turning this, you should feel a little bit of pressure as the jack nut starts to kind of cinch. And one way that you can tell is if you are tightening it down, you can pull up, and eventually you'll notice that the jack nut doesn't come up and down nearly as much as it used to. If when you're installing your jack nut, your carriage bolt comes out and you're not really sure whether or not you've gotten it tightened down all the way, what you would do in this case is we would re-thread in the carriage bolt into the jack nut. And I just like to kind of pull up a little bit on it. And if I see, the bolt is wiggling here, but when I pull up on it, if I see any separation around the seam for the sheet metal, that's probably not a good thing. But this one came in okay. This part of the bolt, it did come out as I was tightening it up, which means that I just didn't set the bolt in there deep enough. I think that no matter how much you try, the jack nut will spin a little bit until it starts to kind of catch. So that's one of the reasons for using a little bit longer carriage bolt. So I got all of the jack nuts installed. I'm gonna lay down some of the OSI Quad Sealant that I've been using. I've been super happy with that. It's not like a lap sealant like you would get with a from like an RV supply store, but from what I can tell, it works really well. Unlike silicone caulking, it doesn't dry hard and brittle. It stays kind of this like elastic putty type of thing. Holds on really well. If you get any on your hands, you're gonna wear it for a little bit. It eventually comes off, but the main goal here is I'm gonna put some of it down that runs all the way around the outside edge. Some is going to get over on the top of the jack nut here, so that there's a seal in between the bottom of the Z bracket and the top of the jack nut. Then on top of the Z bracket, I'm going to put on a little bit more around the opening. Then I'll put in a fender washer and a lock washer before I put in the 1/4-20 bolt. The sealant works pretty well, and the thing about it that I really like, that I've kind of mentioned a number of times, is that this particular type of sealant, it doesn't dry hard like silicone does. It kind of stays in a putty state, so a little bit harder than this, but not so hard and brittle like silicone caulk does. Now, this stuff is also the devil. When it gets on your hands or anything like that, it just gunks up everything. So it's kind of a double-edged sword there. But the way that I'm dealing with it is I'm just gonna rotate the tip around and try and fill in underneath the jack nut where I have installed it. And just a tip for anyone that's gonna do any of this sort of stuff. There are two types of caulking guns. There are ones that are worth having, and there are ones that are not worth having. And so I got this one at Lowe's. It's a Cobalt brand, and it was relatively expensive, but I can promise that I have been happier, and I can run, this is kind of nasty looking, but I can get a better looking bead along a seam with this gun than I can with any of the cheap ones. All right, so I'm out here at my friend's house, and of course my other camera battery died at about the least opportune moment, but I'm going to try and use this hole saw to install this solar cable pass-through, and I've got it, I think, positioned about where I want it. The roof has a little curvature to it, and this isn't super giving, and so I'm going to be using butyl tape as well as some of the self-drilling screws, and I'm going to come in and seal the outside edge with the quad sealant, and I think that should work just fine. I just really need to kind of get it exactly where it needs to go. So I've marked a spot inside of the bus where I think that I'd like the cables to come down. I'm going to take the drill and a small drill bit, drill from the bottom up, and then take the hole saw and drill from the top down, which either will or will not work, and I may end up having to finish it out with a jigsaw, but we'll just see. Okay, so the metal hole saw worked pretty well. It was kind of dull, and so this is a little rougher than I might prefer. But what I'm going to do is I took a file and I kind of went through and cleaned it up. The edges are okay. I might hit it just a little bit more before I install it kind of permanently. But the plan is that I'm going to take this cover, right, and I have marked on the side where the opening is, and then on the front where the opening is, so I can position about where I want it to be. So I'll get it about halfway on, and then I'll come in with one of these markers. So Dixon makes these, Lowe's sells them. They are super inexpensive, but they work really well. So what I'll do is I'll come in and I'll make a small mark on either side here, and then I will do the same thing and position it this way, make a small mark, and then I'll just kind of center and line it up that way so I know about where it is. I'll draw a line around the outside of the unit so I can put down, so I know exactly where to put the butyl tape and all that sort of stuff. Got the hole drawn and got it pretty close. I don't remember exactly who taught me that trick, but like I said, just kind of lining it up, and then you probably can't see the marks anymore. So like here's the front mark and the back mark. Someone taught me that, and I've used that for stuff for the last, I don't know, probably 10 or 15 years, and it works so well if you have to get something positioned exactly in a particular spot. As far as the mount itself, I am not going to use the self-tapping screws to drill a hole through the plastic casing. I'm afraid it might crack. So I have brought up a brad point bit, which is typically used in wood, but it works great in the plastics as well. I'm going to drill a couple of the holes in a few of the positions where I think they're probably going to need to be. And then the butyl tape will go down. I will sink it into the top with the screws, and then from there I'll come back with the lap sealant and go all the way around the outside. So I'm getting ready to drill the holes here in the cover, and the way I'm going to space those is I'm going to put one of the screws down so I can see exactly how much room I'm going to need for the gasket to compress all the way. And then I'm just going to take the tip, where the tip of the screw is, if I've got it laying on there straight, and mark that position. And then I'll know kind of roughly how far in I need to drill the holes. Okay, I'm getting ready to put the cover on, and you notice for the most part, except for where I screwed up here, I've left the paper on the butyl tape as long as I can. Now before you install it, it's a really good idea to kind of push it around and make sure that this weird little, kind of gray putty spreads as evenly as you can possibly get it. Then you can take a razor blade and lift the wax paper up and off. And once that's off, then we're going to look for any gaps. So like right here, if I got the wax paper off, I'm getting ready to put the cover on. Before I do that, I'm going to wet my fingers and kind of push all this together so it makes a nice tight seal. Then I am going to press this on, And then before I put in the bolts, I'm going to put down a little bit more of that OSI Quad Sealant and suck the bolt down into it. I'm really trying to eliminate as many potential problems for leaking as I can. This is one of those areas to where an extra couple of 3 or 4 minutes of unnecessary probably will save you a lot of hassle long term. I've set this on here and I'm going to rock it back and forth a little bit to compress the butyl tape and then put the screws down. Now in this particular case, I don't think I'm going to pre-drill for the holes. I'll do one and determine whether or not that's a bad idea, so I may end up pre-drilling for the rest of them. But it's looking pretty good. Now you can see that there's a little gap here. And this is why we're going to have to go back in and make sure that we seal it really super well with the quad sealant. Now I know that I've got the butyl tape and I've pushed the butyl tape together to where there's no gaps, but I really don't want to have any potential for this to fail. So I'm going to be extra OCD here. Got this installed. I put down the OSI Quad Sealant. I didn't end up needing to drill the pilot holes. It worked out just fine without it. So it looks pretty good right now, but I wanted to drop just a little tip here. Whenever I have to install something like this, I will start at one corner and then work to the adjacent corner, and then that corner, then to this corner. And that helps make sure that I don't accidentally move it left or right or back and forth. When I was doing the solar panels, I did the same thing. When I tightened down the first set of bolts, I did one corner and then I went all the way to the other end and did the other corner just to make sure that I didn't end up moving it at all. And so if you have pre-drilled pilot holes, or in the case of the inserts here, if you have pre-drilled them, you really need them all to kind of line up. And so I don't tighten them down all the way. I get them positioned, I put in the bolts, and then I start working from one corner to the other corner, from the other corner to the other corner. So just a tip if that helps you guys at all.
I don't know what it is about trying to work and film yourself, but I'm not doing either one particularly well. So there's just that.